In the untamed wilderness of 1880s Montana Territory, a desperate letter and the promise of a new life brought Hannah Morgan and her 3 small children across half a continent. What awaited her wasn't the husband she'd been corresponding with, but a freshly dug grave and a town full of closed doors. Alone in a strange land with 3 hungry mouths to feed, Hannah's fate seemed sealed until a mysterious rancher named Jackson Miller stepped from the shadows offering protection. But in a land where fortunes were made and lost on the changing seasons, where the line between survival and ruin was thin as paper, Hannah would soon discover that Jackson's help came with dangers of its own, and secrets that could either save her family or destroy them all. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The stagecoach rattled violently as it hit another deep rut in the dusty road. Hannah Morgan clutched her sleeping 4-year-old daughter closer against her chest and braced herself against the wooden seat. Sarah stirred, but didn't wake, exhausted from the grueling journey. Across from Hannah, her identical twin boys, Timothy and Thomas, sat wide-eyed, their small hands gripping the edge of the bench. "Just a few more miles, little ones," Hannah whispered, offering a smile she didn't feel. The journey from Chicago had been punishing enough, but these final hours through Montana Territory were proving the most difficult. "First time out west, ma'am?" The man sitting diagonally across from her had a weather-beaten face and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "Is it that obvious?" Hannah adjusted Sarah's bonnet, now sadly crushed from the long journey. "Most folks who've lived here a while know to wear clothes that don't show the dust so much," he said with a gentle laugh, nodding at her once fine blue traveling dress and the children's Sunday clothes. Hannah looked down at herself and sighed. The dress had been pristine when she'd boarded the train in Chicago 2 weeks ago. Now it was coated with a fine layer of reddish-brown dust, the hem frayed and dirty. The children hadn't fared any better, their faces smudged despite her best efforts to keep them clean. "I suppose we have a lot to learn," she admitted. The truth was, she had barely given a thought to practical matters like appropriate clothing when she had packed their trunks. Her mind had been filled with desperate hope about reuniting with Robert Parker, the man whose letters had promised salvation for the past 6 months. A successful cattle rancher with a growing operation outside a town called Silver Creek, Robert had placed an advertisement in a Chicago newspaper seeking a wife. His letter had been direct and honest, a widower seeking a partner in life, someone to help manage his household. When Hannah had responded, revealing that she was a widow with 3 young children, she had expected rejection. Instead, his letters had grown increasingly welcoming. At 30 years old, Hannah had resigned herself to struggling through life alone. The influenza that took her husband James had left her with mounting debts and 3 small children to raise. Teaching piano lessons barely kept food on the table. Robert's letters had offered something she'd thought impossible: security for her children and perhaps, in time, companionship for herself. The stagecoach began to slow, pulling Hannah from her thoughts. "Silver Creek, folks," the driver called. "Down. We'll be stopping at Wilson's General Store." Hannah's heart quickened. After months of correspondence and weeks of travel, they were finally here. She smoothed her dress as best she could and checked that the children looked presentable. "Remember what I told you," she said to the twins. "Best manners for Mr. Parker." The boys nodded solemnly, their identical faces serious beneath their sandy hair. At just 6 years old, they'd already learned to be quieter and more responsible than children their age should need to be. The stagecoach came to a stop in a cloud of dust, and the driver opened the door. "Watch your step now," he said, offering his hand. Hannah passed Sarah, still sleeping, to the kindly passenger who'd spoken to her, then helped the twins down before retrieving her daughter and stepping onto the main street of Silver Creek. She looked around at what was to be their new home. A single dirt road lined with wooden buildings, a general store, a saloon, what appeared to be a bank, and various other businesses. Nothing like the bustling streets of Chicago, but it held the promise of a fresh start. Mrs. Morgan, a tall, bespectacled man in a black suit, approached her. He had kind eyes, but a somber expression that immediately sent a chill through her. "Yes, that's me," she replied, shifting Sarah in her arms as the little girl began to wake. "I'm Harold Wilson, owner of the general store and postmaster." He took off his hat and held it in his hands. "I'm afraid I have some difficult news." The world seemed to slow around her. "What is it, Mr. Wilson? Is Robert all right?" The man's eyes dropped to the ground. "I'm very sorry to tell you this, but Mr. Parker passed away 2 weeks ago, thrown from his horse. We buried him 10 days ago." Hannah felt as though the ground had fallen away beneath her feet. She swayed slightly, and Mr. Wilson reached out to steady her. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Morgan. If we'd known you were already on your way, there just wasn't time to send word. 2 weeks, just 2 weeks. If her journey had been slightly faster, if the train hadn't been delayed in Bismarck." "Mama?" Thomas tugged at her skirt, his small face concerned. "Where's Mr. Parker?" Hannah, and couldn't find words to explain. Sarah was fully awake now, looking around with wide eyes at the strange town. "Do you have family back east you can return to?" Mr. Wilson asked gently. The question brought the reality of her situation crashing down. Her teaching position had been filled. She had sold most of their possessions to finance this journey, and the little money she had left wouldn't get them back to Chicago, let alone sustain them if they returned. "No," she said quietly. "There's nothing for us to go back to." Mr. Wilson looked uncomfortable. "Well, I'm sure we can arrange for you to stay at the boarding house for a few days while you decide what to do. Mrs. Hollister is a kind woman, though her rates are—" "I can pay," Hannah said quickly, though she knew her funds were limited. She had expected to step into a marriage and a home, not to be stranded in a strange town with 3 children and no prospects. "There's also the matter of Mr. Parker's property," Mr. Wilson continued. "His ranch, the cattle." "What about it?" Hannah asked. Before Mr. Wilson could elaborate, a commotion from the saloon across the street drew their attention. The swinging doors burst open, and a large man with a wild beard stumbled out, followed by another man who was shouting angrily. "You don't think you can just take Parker's land now that he's dead, Hargrove?" the second man yelled. "The bank has the first claim, and don't you forget it." "That land was promised to me," the bearded man snarled back. "Parker knew he owed me." Mr. Wilson shook his head. "I apologize for this display, Mrs. Morgan. Robert Parker's death has stirred up some conflicts of interest in our town." "I don't understand," Hannah said, instinctively pulling Sarah closer as the twins huddled against her skirts. "What's happening?" Mr. Wilson sighed. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation inside." He led them into the general store, a large, well-stocked establishment with shelves of canned goods, tools, fabrics, and other necessities. At the back was a small office where he offered them seats. His wife, a plump woman with a kind face, appeared with a tray of lemonade and cookies for the children. "Mrs. Wilson, would you mind watching the little ones for a moment while I speak with Mrs. Morgan?" Mr. Wilson asked. His wife nodded, ushering the twins and Sarah to a corner where a small wooden horse and some toys were kept for customers' children. Once they were settled, Mr. Wilson sat across from Hannah. "Mrs. Morgan, Robert Parker was well liked in Silver Creek, but his business dealings were complicated. He borrowed heavily from the bank to expand his cattle operation last year. Then we had a drought, and he lost a good portion of his herd. He never mentioned any financial troubles in his letters," Hannah said. "Men don't like to worry women folk with such matters," Mr. Wilson replied. "The point is, with his passing, there are several parties who believe they have claim to his ranch. The bank holds the mortgage. Hargrove claims Robert promised him land in exchange for help during the drought, and there are others. But what about me? Hannah asked. Surely as his intended wife I have some claim. Mr. Wilson looked uncomfortable. Without a formal marriage having taken place, I'm afraid the law doesn't recognize your position as having any legal standing, unless Mr. Parker left a will naming you specifically. I see. Hannah's voice was small. The realization of their precarious situation was sinking in. 3 children, no home, limited funds, and no prospects in a town where she knew no one. I'm truly sorry, Mr. Wilson said. If you need employment, while you decide what to do, my wife could use help in the store. It's not much, but it would provide you with some income. The offer was kind, but the reality of her situation was beginning to sink in. She had left everything behind for a new life that had evaporated before she even arrived. I appreciate that, Mr. Wilson. I may take you up on it. She rose from her chair. For now, I think I should get the children settled at the boarding house. Mr. Wilson nodded. Of course. I'll have your trunks delivered there. Mrs. Hollister's place is just down the street, the white house with the blue shutters. As Hannah collected her children and left the general store, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the dusty street. The town seemed different now, no longer the setting of a hopeful new beginning, but a strange and potentially hostile place where they had no ties, no protection. Mama, are we going to meet Mr. Parker now? Timothy asked, his small hand in hers. Hannah swallowed hard. No, sweetheart. Mr. Parker. He had to go away. I'll explain everything later. She was halfway to the boarding house when she heard hoofbeats behind her. Turning, she saw a lone rider approaching slowly. His dark hair was long, tied back at the nape of his neck, and his face was deeply tanned from the sun. He sat tall in the saddle of a magnificent black horse, his posture speaking of confidence and strength. As he drew closer, Hannah could see his features more clearly, a strong jawline, high cheekbones, and eyes so intensely blue they were startling against his tanned skin. There was something in those eyes, a weariness, a hardness that made her instinctively pull her children closer. The rider stopped his horse a few feet from her. Mrs. Morgan? Yes, she replied, surprised. How do you know my name? This is a small town, he said simply. News travels fast. He dismounted in one fluid motion and tipped his hat. Jackson Miller. Mr. Miller, she acknowledged with a slight nod. I don't believe Robert mentioned you in his letters. A shadow crossed the man's face. Robert Parker and I weren't exactly friends, but we had an understanding. What kind of understanding? Hannah asked cautiously. Jackson Miller glanced around, as if checking who might be listening. The kind that makes me think you might be in danger now that he's gone. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Hannah's breath caught. Danger? From whom? There are men in this town who would kill for Parker's land, he said, stepping closer and lowering his voice. Some of them already think they have a claim to it. Mr. Wilson said it was influenza. That took him, Hannah said, but a chill ran through her nonetheless. Did he? Miller's expression was unreadable. Parker was as healthy as a horse last time I saw him, just 3 weeks ago. Hannah didn't know what to make of this stranger and his insinuations. The twins were looking up at the tall man with wide eyes, while Sarah had buried her face shyly in Hannah's skirts. Why are you telling me this, Mr. Miller? We've only just met. Because Robert Parker sent me a letter the day before he died, Miller said. He asked me to look out for you and your children if anything happened to him. Said you were coming west to be his wife, and that he feared he'd made enemies who might not want to see that happen. Why would he ask you if you weren't friends? Miller's mouth quivered in what might have been a smile. My ranch borders his to the north. I'm half Blackfoot. People in town don't always take kindly to men like me. Parker was one of the few who treated me fair. We helped each other out from time to time." Hannah studied him. There was indeed a hardness to him, but also something else, a sense of honor perhaps, in the way he held himself and spoke directly. "What exactly are you suggesting, Mr. Miller?" "I'm suggesting that you be careful who you trust in Silver Creek," he said, "and I'm offering you and your children protection if you want it. My ranch house has plenty of room. You'd be safer there than at the boarding house in town, at least until we figure out what really happened to Parker and what it means for you." Hannah was taken aback. "Mr. Miller, I barely know you. It wouldn't be proper for me to stay at your home." "My sister lives on the property," he said. "Your reputation would be safe." He shrugged. "But it's your choice. I'm just keeping a promise to a man who asked for my help." Before Hannah could respond, a shout from down the street caught their attention. It was the bearded man from earlier, Hargrove, and he was striding toward them with purpose, his hand hovering near the gun at his hip. "Miller!" he bellowed. "What are you doing talking to Parker's woman?" Jackson stepped slightly in front of Hannah and the children, his posture relaxed but alert. "Just being neighborly, Hargrove. Something you might try sometime," Hargrove sneered. "We don't need your kind of neighborliness around here." He turned to Hannah. "Ma'am, you should know that Parker's ranch is likely to be mine soon enough. The bank might hold the papers, but I hold the water rights to the creek that runs through that property. Without water, that land ain't worth spit." "Is that why you were so interested in buying it from him while he was alive?" Miller asked coolly. "Strange how you suddenly have a claim to it now that he's dead." Hargrove's face reddened. "You watch your mouth, you half-breed." "Or what?" Miller's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath it. For a tense moment, the two men stared at each other. Then Hargrove spat on the ground and turned back to Hannah. "You'd do well to stay away from this one, ma'am. He's bad news." With that, Hargrove stormed off toward the saloon. Hannah's heart was racing. The confrontation had been brief but intense, and it confirmed that there was more happening in Silver Creek than a simple case of a rancher's untimely death. The twins were pressed against her, frightened by the angry man, and Sarah had begun to whimper. "Do you see what I mean?" Miller asked quietly. "There's something not right about Parker's death, and you and your children are caught in the middle of it without even knowing the players." Hannah took a deep breath. She considered her options: stay at the boarding house in a town where she knew no one and might be in danger, try to make her way back east with 3 small children and limited funds, or trust this stranger who claimed to have promised Robert he would protect them. None of the choices were ideal, but one offered at least the possibility of safety for her children. "My trunks are being delivered to the boarding house," she said finally. "We'll stop there first." Miller nodded. "I'll wait outside while you explain to Mrs. Hollister that you've made other arrangements." As they walked toward the boarding house, Hannah couldn't help but wonder if she was making a terrible mistake. But there was something about Jackson Miller, a steadiness, a quiet strength that made her want to trust him. The sun had almost disappeared behind the distant mountains, casting the town in deepening shadows. As darkness fell over Silver Creek, Hannah Morgan made her decision. She would go with Jackson Miller to his ranch. She would discover the truth about Robert Parker's death, and perhaps, in doing so, she would find a way to secure her children's future in this wild, dangerous land that was supposed to have been their home. What she couldn't know was that the danger was only beginning, and that before long her children's lives would depend on the protection of a man she had just met, a man with secrets of his own that would soon collide with hers. In ways she could never have imagined, the journey to Jackson Miller's ranch took nearly an hour, with darkness falling completely before they arrived. Hannah sat beside Jackson on his wagon, her children huddled close around her, their trunks secured in the back. She watched as the town of Silver Creek faded into the distance behind them, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake trusting this stranger. Yet what choice did she have? With Robert gone and hostile forces circling, her children needed shelter and protection while she figured out their next steps. Neither spoke much during the ride, each lost in their own thoughts as the wagon wheels crunched over the rough terrain. The twins had finally fallen silent, exhausted from the day's journey and revelations, while Sarah slept soundly in Hannah's arms. When they finally crested a small hill, Hannah caught her first glimpse of the Miller Ranch, nestled in a valley with mountains rising in the distance. The main house was larger than she had expected, a solid two-story structure built of timber and stone. A barn stood nearby, along with several smaller outbuildings. A corral held a few horses that lifted their heads at the sound of the approaching wagon. "It's beautiful," Hannah said softly, genuinely surprised by the scope and quality of the property. Jackson glanced at her, then back at his ranch. "It's taken 10 years to build it to what you see now. My father left me this land, but not much else." As they drew closer, a figure emerged from the main house, a woman with long black hair worn in a single braid, her dark eyes watching their approach with a curious expression. "That's my sister Rebecca," Jackson explained. "She's lived with me since our parents passed. Don't let her quiet manner fool you, she's got a good heart." He brought the wagon to a stop in front of the house and climbed down, then helped Hannah descend with Sarah, still sleeping in her arms. The twins climbed down themselves, staying close to their mother, regarding the strange surroundings with wide, cautious eyes. "Who are these people, Jackson?" Rebecca asked, her voice carrying a melodic quality that belied her stern expression. "This is Mrs. Hannah Morgan and her children," Jackson replied. "The woman Robert Parker sent for." Recognition dawned in Rebecca's eyes. "The mail-order bride." She looked at Hannah and the children with renewed interest. "But why are they here?" "Parker's dead," Jackson said quietly. "Mrs. Morgan arrived to find herself in a difficult situation. They'll be staying with us for a while." Rebecca's expression softened as she took in the tired children and their clearly exhausted mother. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Morgan. Come inside. You all must be hungry and tired." The interior of the house was surprisingly comfortable. The main room featured a large stone fireplace, sturdy furniture, and shelves lined with books, more books than Hannah would have expected to find in a ranch house on the frontier. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm glow over the room. "You have quite a library," Hannah remarked, running her fingers along the spines as the twins investigated the room with curious eyes. "My mother's influence," Jackson said from behind her. "She was a school teacher before she married my father." "Was she Blackfoot as well?" Hannah asked cautiously. "No," he replied, a hint of a smile touching his lips. "She came west from Boston, taught at a mission school near Helena. Met my father when her stagecoach was attacked by bandits. He saved her life." There was an undercurrent of pride in his voice, but also something else, a guardedness Hannah couldn't quite place. Rebecca appeared from what Hannah presumed was the kitchen. "Supper is nearly ready. I've prepared a room for you and the little ones upstairs. There's water for washing if you'd like to freshen up first." "Thank you," Hannah said, genuinely touched by the hospitality. "Boys, come along, let's get cleaned up." The bedroom was simple but immaculate, with a large bed, a small trundle that could be pulled out for the twins, and a cradle that looked handmade. Someone had thought of everything they might need. Hannah felt a wave of emotion at this unexpected kindness after such a difficult day. After washing away the trail dust and changing the children into clean nightclothes, they joined their hosts for a simple but hearty supper of venison stew, fresh bread, and wild greens. The twins, usually shy around strangers, were too hungry to maintain their reserve and ate with enthusiasm. "Your children have good appetites," Rebecca observed, with the first genuine smile Hannah had seen from her. "They're good boys," Hannah replied, helping Sarah with her spoon, "though they can be a handful at times." "Twins must be twice the work," Rebecca said. "And twice the joy," Hannah added, though the strain of raising them alone showed in the shadows. Beneath her eyes, "Mr. Miller," Hannah said as they ate, "you mentioned that Robert wrote to you before he died. Did he give any indication that he feared for his life?" Jackson exchanged a glance with his sister before answering. "He didn't say it outright, just that he'd made some decisions that weren't sitting well with certain people in town." "What kind of decisions?" "He refused to sell his water rights to Hargrove, for one," Jackson replied. "Hargrove has been buying up land all around the county, but without water the land is worthless for cattle. Parker's property has one of the few year-round creeks in the area." "And the bank?" Hannah asked. "Mr. Wilson mentioned that Robert owed them money." "Maxwell Bennett runs the bank in Silver Creek," Jackson explained. "He and Parker had a complicated history. Bennett wanted Parker's land for his own reasons. Something to do with a railroad spur coming through. There were rumors that Bennett was putting pressure on Parker, calling in loans before they were due." Hannah considered this information. So both Hargrove and Bennett had reason to want Robert's land. "But surely you don't think one of them would have—" She paused, unwilling to say the word murdered in front of her children. "Men have killed for less in these parts," Rebecca said bluntly, casting a meaningful glance at the children. "Land, water, gold, they're worth more than human life to some." "But Mr. Wilson said it was an accident," Hannah protested, "thrown from his horse." "Dr. Camden is the one who would have determined the cause of death," Jackson said. "And Dr. Camden owes Bennett money for his practice. He might say whatever Bennett tells him to say." The implications were chilling. Hannah set down her spoon, her appetite suddenly gone. "What am I to do? I have no claim to Robert's property, no way to prove anything if he was indeed murdered, and very limited funds to make my way elsewhere with 3 children." "For now you stay here where it's safe," Jackson said firmly. "Tomorrow I'll ride into town and see what more I can find out. I know people who won't lie to me, even if they're afraid of Bennett or Hargrove." After dinner, Rebecca showed Hannah and the children to their room. The boys were already half asleep on their feet, and Sarah had nodded off during the meal. Once the children were settled in bed, Hannah found herself alone with Rebecca. "Thank you for your hospitality," Hannah said. "I know our arrival was unexpected." Rebecca studied her for a moment. "Jackson doesn't bring people here, ever. You must be special." Before Hannah could respond to that puzzling statement, Rebecca bid her good night and left, closing the door behind her. Alone at last, Hannah sat on the edge of the bed, her mind spinning with the day's events. This morning, she had been full of hope for a new beginning with Robert. Now he was dead, possibly murdered, and she was staying in the home of a man she had just met, a man who seemed to have his own mysterious connection to Robert. From her window, she could see the vast expanse of land that made up the Miller ranch, silvered by moonlight. In the distance, the dark shapes of mountains loomed against the star-filled sky. It was beautiful in a wild, untamed way that both frightened and exhilarated her. With a sigh, Hannah began to unpack one of her trunks, seeking her nightclothes. As she did, her fingers brushed against the packet of letters from Robert that she had brought with her. She pulled them out and sat at the small desk, untying the ribbon that held them together. Reading through them again, she searched for any hint that Robert had been in trouble or feared for his life. His words were as she remembered, warm, practical, full of plans for their future together. He described the ranch, the house he had built for them, how he'd prepared a room for the children. Nothing in his letters suggested fear or danger. Yet, he had written to Jackson Miller, asking him to protect her if anything happened. Why? What had changed between his last letter to her and his death? The sound of footsteps in the hallway pulled her from her thoughts. She quickly gathered the letters and returned them to her trunk before a soft knock came at the door. "Mrs. Morgan, it's Jackson. May I speak with you for a moment?" Hannah checked that the children were sleeping soundly before opening the door. Jackson stood in the hallway holding a small wooden box. "I'm sorry to disturb you," he said, "but I thought you should have this tonight." He held out the box. "It was Robert's. He asked me to keep it safe for him about a month ago. Said if anything happened to him, it should go to you." Hannah took the box with trembling hands. It was about the size of a book, made of polished walnut with a simple brass latch. "Did he tell you what was inside?" Jackson shook his head. "No, only that it contained something that might protect you if he couldn't." Hannah's heart raced. "Thank you for giving this to me." Jackson nodded, then hesitated as if he wanted to say more. Finally, he simply said, "Good night, Mrs. Morgan. Try to rest. Tomorrow may be a difficult day." After he left, Hannah returned to the desk and placed the box before her. Her fingers traced the smooth wood before finally lifting the latch. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was a folded document and a small leather pouch. She opened the document first. It was a deed to Robert Parker's ranch, and at the bottom, dated just 2 weeks ago, was Robert's signature transferring ownership to Hannah Morgan, my intended wife, and her children. Stunned, Hannah read the document twice more. According to this paper, she owned the Parker Ranch, but Mr. Wilson had said she had no legal claim without a marriage having taken place. Next, she opened the small leather pouch. Inside was a simple gold band, a wedding ring, and a note in Robert's handwriting. "My dearest Hannah, if you are reading this, then my fears have been realized, and I'm no longer able to welcome you and your little ones to our home as I had hoped. I've made enemies here, men who would stop at nothing to take what is mine. I have transferred the deed to the ranch to your name, and I have entrusted this package to Jackson Miller, the only man in these parts I trust completely. The enclosed ring was my mother's. I had hoped to place it on your finger myself, but if fate has decided otherwise, please know that in my heart you were already my wife. Be careful who you trust in Silver Creek. Jackson Miller may seem a hard man, but he is honorable to his core. Trust him as I have." With all my affection, Robert. Tears blurred Hannah's vision as she finished reading. Robert had tried to protect her even in death, but the deed raised as many questions as it answered. If it was legal, why hadn't Mr. Wilson mentioned it? Did he not know about it, or was he deliberately keeping it from her? And what of Jackson Miller? Robert had trusted him implicitly, yet Jackson himself had said they weren't friends. What was the nature of their relationship really? Hannah slipped the ring onto her finger. It was slightly too large, but the weight of it was comforting somehow, a tangible connection to the man she had hoped to marry. Sleep did not come easily that night. Hannah's dreams were troubled, filled with shadowy figures and the sound of horses' hooves. She woke several times, each time reassured by the steady breathing of her children and the solid walls of the Miller house around her. When morning arrived with the crowing of roosters and smells of coffee and bacon drifting up from below, Hannah dressed quickly in one of her simpler dresses, pinned her hair into a practical bun, and tucked the deed and Robert's note securely into her pocket before waking the children. The twins were uncharacteristically quiet as she helped them dress, sensing the gravity of their situation despite their young age. Sarah, too young to understand, babbled happily, the only one untouched by the cloud that hung over them. In the kitchen, they found Rebecca at the stove and Jackson seated. At a small table, a mug of coffee in his hands. They both looked up as the family entered. "Good morning," Hannah said, helping the twins onto a bench at the table. "I hope we're not too late for breakfast." "Just in time," Rebecca replied, placing a plate of eggs, bacon, and biscuits on the table. As Hannah seated herself with Sarah on her lap, Jackson studied her face. "You look tired. Did you not sleep well?" "I had much to think about," she admitted. After a moment's hesitation, she pulled the deed from her pocket and placed it on the table between them. "Robert left me his ranch." Jackson didn't look surprised. He picked up the document and examined it. "This appears to be an order. It's properly signed and witnessed." "Did you know about this?" Hannah asked. "I suspected," he admitted. "Robert told me he was planning to put the ranch in your name to protect it from Bennett and Hargrove. I didn't know if he'd actually done it before he died. Why didn't you mention this last night? I didn't want to give you false hope, and I needed to be sure of a few things first." Hannah frowned. "Such as?" "Such as whether Bennett already knew about this deed." Jackson's expression was grim. "If he does, it would explain why Robert died so suddenly, just days before you arrived. The implications were chilling. You think Mr. Bennett had Robert killed because of this deed? It's possible. With Robert dead, and you not yet arrived, Bennett might have thought he could claim the ranch through the debts Robert owed the bank. He wouldn't have expected Robert to have already transferred ownership. But now that I'm here, with the deed, now, you're in danger," Jackson finished for her. "If Bennett is willing to kill once for that land, he won't hesitate to do it again." Rebecca, who had been listening silently, spoke up. "The woman needs protection, Jackson. More than just staying here." Jackson nodded. "I know. That's why I sent for Federal Marshal Caldwell early this morning. He should be here by afternoon." "The Federal Marshal?" Hannah asked. "Yes, he's based in Helena, but makes regular rounds through the territory. He's a good man, and he's not under Bennett's influence. If there's been a murder, he'll investigate properly." Hannah's mind was racing. "What should I do in the meantime? If this deed is legal, the ranch is mine. I should go there, see it for myself." "That would be foolish," Rebecca said bluntly. "Until we know who killed Robert Parker and why, you and your children are safer here." "Rebecca is right," Jackson agreed. "Stay here today. Once Marshal Caldwell arrives, we can decide the next steps." Hannah wanted to protest, but knew they were right. She had no experience with the dangers of this territory, and the thought of facing men like Hargrove or Bennett with her children in tow was terrifying. "Very well," she conceded. "We'll stay. But I want to know everything you find out." Jackson finished his coffee and stood. "I need to check the south pasture. One of my hands reported seeing strangers near the property line yesterday." "Do you think it's related to all of this?" Hannah asked, alarmed at the possibility that danger might have followed them to the Miller Ranch. "I don't believe in coincidences," he replied grimly. "Not in this territory." He looked at Rebecca. "Keep the rifle handy." The older woman nodded, and Jackson left, the sound of his spurs fading as he walked down the hallway. Rebecca began clearing the breakfast dishes, and the twins slipped from the table to explore their new surroundings under Hannah's watchful eye. "He's worried," Rebecca said quietly, nodding in the direction Jackson had gone. "I haven't seen him this tense in years." "You've known him a long time," Hannah observed. Rebecca gave her a strange look. "All his life. I'm his sister." Of course, Hannah thought. Yet there was something in Rebecca's manner that suggested there was more to the story than she was telling. "Jackson seems to have a complicated relationship with the townspeople," Hannah ventured. Rebecca's face tightened. "People in Silver Creek don't take kindly to those with Indian blood. Our father was white, our mother Blackfoot. That's enough for some folks to treat us like we don't belong, no matter how successful the ranch becomes." Hannah nodded, understanding. Better now, the wariness she'd sensed in both siblings. Robert seemed to trust Jackson. Robert Parker was a good judge of character, Rebecca agreed. He was one of the few white men who treated Jackson with respect despite his heritage. She glanced at Hannah. "That's why Jackson agreed to help you, you know. Not just because Robert asked, but because he respected the man." Before Hannah could Respond! The sound of approaching horses interrupted their conversation. Rebecca moved quickly to the window, then reached for the rifle that hung on hooks above the door. "Stay inside," she ordered, her voice tense. "It's Hargrove, and he's brought men with him." Hannah's heart hammered in her chest as she peered through the curtains. 6 riders were approaching the house, led by the bearded man she had encountered in town the previous day. All of them were armed. "Where's Jackson?" she asked, fear tightening her throat. "Still checking the south pasture. He won't be back for at least an hour," Rebecca replied, checking the rifle with practiced hands. "Take the children upstairs and stay out of sight. I'll handle this." "I can't leave you alone to face them," Hannah protested. "You can and you will," the older woman said firmly. "Jackson would never forgive me if something happened to those little ones. Now go." Reluctantly, Hannah ushered the twins up the stairs, carrying Sarah on her hip. Instead of hiding in their bedroom, she went to the window in Jackson's study, which overlooked the front of the house. From there, she could see Hargrove and his men dismounting, their expressions grim and determined, as Rebecca stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. "Where is she, woman?" Hargrove demanded, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "I know Miller brought her here." "This is private property," Rebecca replied calmly. "You and your men need to leave." Hargrove laughed, an ugly sound. "You think that rifle scares us? There's 6 of us and 1 of you. Now, I'm not looking to hurt anyone. I just want to talk to Mrs. Morgan about Parker's ranch." "Mr. Miller isn't here," Rebecca said. "Come back when he returns if you have business to discuss." One of Hargrove's men, a thin, wiry fellow with a pockmarked face, spat on the ground. "We ain't here to talk to the half-breed. We're here for the woman and those brats of hers." Hannah's blood ran cold. How did they know she had the deed? Had someone in town seen Robert give the box to Jackson? Or was this simply about intimidating her as the newcomer who might have a claim to Robert's property? Whatever the reason, she couldn't let Rebecca face these men alone. Drawing a deep breath, Hannah checked that the children were settled in the study with a picture book, then headed downstairs. "I'm right here, Mr. Hargrove," she called out as she stepped onto the porch beside Rebecca. "Mrs. Morgan." Hargrove removed his hat with exaggerated courtesy. "We were just discussing your situation." "My situation is none of your concern," Hannah replied, keeping her voice steady despite her fear. "Oh, but it is." Hargrove's smile faded. "You see, Robert Parker died owing me quite a bit of money. His ranch rightfully belongs to me now." "That's between you and the bank, Mr. Hargrove," Hannah responded. "I failed to see how it involves me." "Don't play coy, Mrs. Morgan. Word in town is that Parker might have left you something, a deed perhaps, so he did know." Hannah fought to keep her expression neutral. "I arrived in Silver Creek yesterday to find the man I was supposed to marry already buried. I'm simply trying to decide what to do next." "Well, I'd like to make you an offer," Hargrove said, taking a step closer to the porch. Rebecca raised, the rifle slightly halting his advance. "If Parker did leave you anything, I'm prepared to buy it from you. A fair price, enough to get you and those children settled back east." "That's very generous," Hannah replied carefully. "But as I said, I'm still considering my options." "Don't consider too long," Hargrove warned, his friendly facade slipping. "This territory isn't kind to women alone. Accidents happen, especially to those who get mixed up with people like the Millers." "Is that a threat, Mr. Hargrove?" "Just friendly advice. You're new here. You don't know who you can trust." He settled his hat back on his head. "I'll give you until tomorrow to think about my offer. After that, things might get complicated." With a nod to his men, Hargrove turned and mounted his horse. The others followed suit, but they didn't immediately ride away. Instead, they sat watching the house as if memorizing its layout. "This isn't over," Rebecca muttered. "They're planning something." As if confirming her words, Hargrove called out one last time before riding off, Tell Miller we stopped by, and tell him to remember what happened the last time he got between me and land I wanted." Hannah and Rebecca remained on the porch until the riders disappeared from view. Only then did Hannah release the breath she'd been holding, her knees suddenly weak with relief and delayed fear. "You should have stayed upstairs," Rebecca scolded. But there was respect in her eyes. "I couldn't let you face them alone," Hannah replied. "What did Hargrove mean about the last time Jackson got between him and land?" Rebecca's expression darkened. 2 years ago, Hargrove tried to force a widow, Martha Sullivan, off her land. Jackson stood up for her, helped her keep the property. Hargrove never forgave him for it. What happened to Mrs. Sullivan? She eventually sold her land to a family from Kansas, not to Hargrove, and moved to Denver to be with her sister. Rebecca shouldered the rifle. "Come inside. We need to secure the house in case they come back." As they went inside, Hannah couldn't shake the feeling that Hargrove's visit was just the beginning. Where is this Marshal Caldwell that Jackson sent for? Shouldn't he have arrived by now? The nearest federal marshal's office is in Helena. It's a full day's ride. He won't be here until tomorrow at the earliest. Rebecca walked to a cabinet in the corner of the main room and unlocked it, revealing several guns and boxes of ammunition. "Can you shoot?" "I've never even held a gun," Hannah admitted, thinking of her sheltered life in Chicago. Rebecca sighed. "Then it's time you learned." She selected a small revolver and handed it to Hannah. "This is a Smith & Wesson Model 3, smaller than most. Good for a woman's hand. 5 shots, double action." Hannah took the gun gingerly, surprised by its weight. "I don't know if I could actually shoot someone." "When it's your children's lives or theirs, you'll find you can," Rebecca said grimly. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that." The next hour was spent with Rebecca, showing Hannah how to load, aim, and fire the revolver. They practiced in the barn, using empty bottles as targets. Hannah was a poor shot at first, but gradually improved under Rebecca's patient instruction. "Not bad," the older woman said after Hannah finally hit a bottle. "Keep practicing. I need to prepare lunch for the children." Left alone in the barn, Hannah continued to practice, each shot becoming more accurate as she grew accustomed to the revolver's weight and kick. The activity helped distract her from the fear that had settled in her stomach since Hargrove's visit. She was reloading the gun when the barn door opened. Startled, she nearly dropped the weapon, then relaxed when she saw it was Jackson. "Rebecca told me what happened," he said, his expression grim. "Hargrove is getting bolder." "He knows about the deed," Hannah replied. "How is that possible?" Bennett must have told him. "They've been working together lately." Jackson glanced at the revolver in her hands. "I see Rebecca has been teaching you to defend yourself." She thought it was necessary. Hannah looked down at the gun. "Do you think Hargrove will come back?" "Not today. He'll wait until he thinks we've let our guard down." Jackson moved to stand beside her, gently adjusting her grip on the revolver. "Hold it like this. It will give you better control." His hands were warm and calloused against hers, steady and sure. Hannah was suddenly very aware of his proximity, of the scent of leather and horses that clung to him. She swallowed hard and focused on the target. "I've sent one of my hands to look for Marshal Caldwell," Jackson continued, stepping back, "to hurry him along. In the meantime, I think we should move you and the children to Parker's ranch." Hannah looked at him in surprise. "I thought you said it wasn't safe." "It's not, but Hargrove and his men will be watching this place now. They won't expect us to take you to Parker's property. And I need to show you something there, something that might explain why Robert was killed." "What is it?" "Better I show you. We'll go at dusk, when we're less likely to be seen." The rest of the afternoon passed in tense preparation. Jackson and his ranch hands patrolled the property, while Rebecca packed food and supplies for their journey to Parker's ranch. Hannah spent time with her children, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy despite the circumstances. The twins, perceptive beyond their years, were unusually quiet, sensing the tension in the adults around them. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the land, Jackson returned to the house. "It's time," he said quietly. "I've had." The horses brought around back. Rebecca handed Hannah a bundle wrapped in oilcloth, food, water, and a few other necessities. "The revolver is already loaded and in there too." "You're not coming with us?" Hannah asked, alarmed. "Someone needs to stay here to maintain appearances," the older woman replied. "If Hargrove or his men come back, they need to think you're still here." Hannah hugged Rebecca impulsively. "Thank you for everything. Please be careful." "It's you who needs to be careful," Rebecca said, returning the embrace briefly before stepping back. "Listen to Jackson. He knows this territory better than anyone." They slipped out the back door of the house as darkness fell. 2 horses waited, already saddled. Jackson helped the twins mount in front of him on his horse, while Hannah carried Sarah in a sling across her chest as she rode. "Stay close," he murmured. "We'll take the creek bed for the first few miles. It'll hide our tracks." They rode in silence, the only sounds the soft clopping of the horses' hooves and the occasional cry of a night bird. Hannah had never ridden at night before, and she found it both terrifying and exhilarating. The landscape was transformed by moonlight, familiar shapes becoming strange and mysterious. Jackson led them along a winding path, sometimes stopping to listen intently before moving on. After what seemed like hours, they crested a ridge, and he held up a hand for her to halt. "Parker's Ranch," he said quietly, pointing to a valley below. Hannah peered into the darkness. A small ranch house was visible, along with a barn and corral. No light shone from the windows, and the place had an abandoned feel that sent a shiver down her spine. "It looks so empty," she whispered. "It's been empty since Robert died," Jackson replied. "His foreman and the other hands left when they heard. The bank might take the property." He nudged his horse forward. "Come on! We'll approach from the east, through that stand of trees." As they drew closer to the ranch, Hannah could make out more details in the moonlight. The house was smaller than Jackson's, but well built, with a wide porch and large windows. A garden, now untended, stretched along one side. It was exactly as Robert had described it in his letters. Jackson led them to the barn rather than the house. "We'll leave the horses here," he said, dismounting and helping Hannah and the children down. "Less chance of them being spotted if someone comes looking." Inside the barn, he lit a small lantern, keeping the flame low. The building was neat and well organized, with stalls for several horses, tack hanging on the walls, and hay lofts above. "Robert was a good rancher," Jackson commented, looking around. "I kept everything in order." "What did you want to show me?" Hannah asked, her curiosity growing. "It's in the house, but first we need to make sure we're alone." They approached the house cautiously, Jackson with his rifle ready, Hannah with the revolver Rebecca had given her. The front door was locked, but Jackson produced a key from his pocket. "Robert gave me this," he explained, "for emergencies." The interior of the house was dark and still, with furniture covered in sheets to protect it from dust. Jackson lit another lantern and led Hannah through the rooms. It was a comfortable home, simply but tastefully furnished, with a large stone fireplace in the main room and a well-equipped kitchen. "He built all this for you and your children," Jackson said quietly. "He was so sure you would love it here." Tears pricked at Hannah's eyes. This should have been her home, her life with Robert and the children. Now it stood empty, waiting for new owners who might never appreciate the care and love that had gone into creating it. "You said there was something here that might explain why Robert was killed," she reminded Jackson, forcing her thoughts away from what might have been. Jackson nodded and led her to a small study off the main room. A desk stood against one wall, its surface bare except for a ledger and an inkwell. He moved to a bookshelf and pulled out several volumes, revealing a small safe built into the wall behind them. "Robert showed me this once," he said, working. The combination. Said if anything happened to him I should check what was inside. The safe opened with a soft click. Jackson reached in and pulled out a leather folder. "This is what I wanted you to see." Hannah took the folder and opened it. On the desk, inside were maps, letters, and legal documents. She frowned as she examined them. "These are surveys and land deeds." "Not just any land," Jackson said. "Look at the dates and locations." As Hannah studied the documents more carefully, a pattern emerged. All of the properties were in Silver Creek County, and all had been purchased within the last year by Robert. "Parker, I don't understand," she said. "Why would Robert buy all these different parcels of land? Some of them don't even look suitable for ranching." "They're not," Jackson agreed, "but they all have one thing in common." He pulled out a larger map and spread it on the desk. "Each piece of land sits along the proposed route of the Northern Pacific Railroad spur." Hannah's eyes widened as she saw the line drawn across the map, connecting the scattered properties Robert had purchased. He was buying land for the railroad. Not exactly. He was buying land the railroad would need. Jackson's voice was grim. "Maxwell Bennett has been working with the railroad for years, secretly acquiring property along their planned route. When the railroad officially announces the route, land prices will skyrocket." "So Robert was competing with Bennett," Hannah said, understanding dawning. "Buying the same land Bennett wanted." "Yes, and there's more." Jackson showed her another document. "This letter is from the railroad. They were considering changing their route to go through Parker's ranch instead of the land Bennett had been acquiring. Because of the water," Hannah realized, "they would need water for the steam engines." "Exactly. If the railroad chose Parker's route, all of Bennett's land investments would be worthless." Jackson's expression was somber. "That's the motive. For murder, Hannah, Bennett stood to lose everything if Robert succeeded. The pieces were falling into place. Robert's death, the sudden interest in his ranch, the pressure on Hannah to sell. It all made sense in light of these documents. "We need to take these to Marshal Caldwell," she said. "They're evidence." "Yes, but first we should." A sound from outside interrupted him, the distant but unmistakable noise of approaching horses. Jackson immediately extinguished the lantern, plunging them into darkness. "Stay here," he whispered. "Don't move." He moved silently to the window and peered out through a gap in the curtains. Hannah held her breath, straining to hear. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder, then stopped. Men's voices carried faintly on the night air. Jackson returned to her side. "Hargrove and his men," he murmured in her ear. "At least 4 of them. They must have followed us somehow." "What do we do?" Hannah whispered back, fear clutching at her throat. "Take the documents and go out the back door. There's a root cellar, about 50 yards behind the house. Hide there while I draw them away. I can't leave you to face them alone." "You have to." His voice was firm. "Those documents are the only proof we have of why Robert was killed. If anything happens to them, or to you and the children, his death was for nothing." Before she could protest further, the crack of a rifle shot split the night, a bullet splintering the window frame and sending shards of wood flying. "Parker, woman!" Hargrove's voice bellowed from outside. "We know you're in there. Come out now and nobody gets hurt." Jackson grabbed Hannah's hand and pulled her toward the back of the house. "They're trying to scare us into doing something stupid," he whispered. "Stay low." They crouched as they moved through the darkened house, another shot ringing out behind. Or them. When they reached the kitchen, Jackson checked the back door and yard. "It looks clear, but they might have men circling around," he said. "Get the children from the barn and run straight for the root cellar. Don't stop, don't look back." "What about you?" "I'll hold them off, then join you." He touched her cheek briefly. "Be ready." Jackson threw open the door and fired 2 quick shots into the darkness, providing cover. Hannah ran, her heart pounding in her chest, expecting at any moment to hear a shot or feel a bullet. She made it to the barn, and gathered the sleepy, frightened children. "We have to be very quiet," she whispered to the twins. "It's like a game of hide and seek. Can you be brave for me?" The boys nodded, their eyes wide with fear but trusting. Hannah led them out the back of the barn and across the open ground toward the root cellar Jackson had described. She could hear more gunfire now, shots coming from different directions as Jackson moved to draw Hargrove's men away from their path. The root cellar was built into a small hillside, its wooden doors lying flat against the ground. Hannah yanked one open and helped the children down the steps, then pulled the door closed above them, plunging them into complete darkness. The earth cellar smelled of dirt and old vegetables. Hannah felt her way to the far wall and huddled there with her children, trying to quiet their frightened breathing. The twins pressed against her sides while Sarah, thankfully, remained asleep in her sling. Minutes stretched endlessly. The shooting seemed to move away from the house, then back again. Hannah clutched the leather folder with one hand and the revolver with the other, her palms slick with sweat. What was happening? Was Jackson alive? A sudden silence fell, more terrifying than the gunfire. Hannah strained to hear anything, voices, footsteps, horses, but there was nothing. The silence stretched on until she began to wonder if both sides had somehow killed each other, leaving her and the children alone. Then, so faint she almost missed it, came the sound of approaching footsteps, someone walking directly toward the root cellar. Heavy boots on dirt, moving slowly but deliberately. Hannah raised the revolver, aiming it at the doors above her, her finger trembling on the trigger as one of the doors creaked open, allowing a sliver of moonlight to penetrate the darkness. "Hannah," Jackson's voice was barely above a whisper. "Are you in there?" Relief flooded through her. "Yes," she whispered back. "We're all here." The door opened wider, and Jackson's silhouette appeared against the night sky. "It's safe for now," he said, reaching down to help them out. "Hargrove and his men retreated, but they'll be back with reinforcements." Hannah climbed out of the cellar, lifting the children one by one. "Are you hurt?" "Just a graze," he said dismissively, though she could see a dark stain on his left sleeve. "We need to move quickly. Our horses might have been spooked by the gunfire. We'll have to go on foot." "On foot? With 3 children?" Hannah couldn't keep the dismay from her voice. "There's an old Blackfoot shelter about 3 miles from here," Jackson explained. "We can hide there until morning, then try to find Marshall." In Caldwell, before heading back to my ranch, Sarah had awakened during the commotion and was whimpering softly. Hannah bounced her gently, trying to soothe her. The twins stood close by, their faces pale in the moonlight. Timothy, Thomas, Jackson knelt down to their level. "I need you to be brave like your mother. Can you walk quietly through the woods with us?" The boys nodded solemnly, clearly frightened but determined. Jackson gave them an approving nod, then stood and offered Hannah the folder of documents she had dropped in her haste to escape. "We need to leave now," he said, his voice low and urgent. "They'll search the house and barn thoroughly before giving up. This way." Jackson led them away from the ranch, keeping to the shadows as they entered the wooded area beyond the property. The night had grown colder, and Hannah was grateful for the warm clothing Rebecca had insisted they wear. Sarah had quieted and was drifting back to sleep in the sling. The twins stumbled occasionally in the darkness, but kept pace remarkably. Well, they walked for what seemed like hours, Jackson setting a pace that challenged the children, but was still manageable. Finally, when Hannah thought they couldn't go much farther, they reached a small stream. "We'll follow this upstream for 1/2 mile, Jackson whispered. "The shelter is just beyond that ridge." The water provided a natural path through the wilderness, and the sound masked any noise they might make. The twins had grown silent with exhaustion, and Hannah carried first one, then the other when they couldn't walk anymore. "Let me," Jackson insisted, lifting both boys easily despite his injured arm. "We're almost there." The shelter, when they finally reached it, was little more than a cave in the rocky hillside, its entrance partially concealed by brush and fallen. logs. Inside, however, it opened into a surprisingly spacious chamber with a small natural chimney that would allow a fire without revealing their location. "My people used this place for generations," Jackson explained, as he built a small fire in a ring of stones. First as a hunting shelter, then as a hiding place during the Indian Wars. Few white men know of its existence. In the growing firelight, Hannah could see symbols and pictographs painted on the walls, handprints, animals, and designs in ochre and black. Despite their exhaustion and the danger they were fleeing, the twins stared at the ancient artwork with awe. "Did you make these pictures, Mr. Miller?" Timothy asked, his voice small in the cave's stillness. Jackson smiled, one of the few genuine smiles Hannah had seen from him. "No, little man. These were made by my mother's people hundreds of years ago. They tell stories of great hunts and battles, of vision quests and ceremonies." "Were they Indians?" Thomas asked. "Blackfoot," Jackson corrected gently. "They lived on this land long before any white settlers came. My grandmother was a Blackfoot medicine woman." Hannah settled Sarah on a bed of pine boughs Jackson had arranged, then helped the twins out of their coats and boots. The boys were asleep almost instantly, curled together like puppies, their faces peaceful, despite everything they'd been through. Jackson handed Hannah a canteen of water he'd filled at the stream. "Small sips," he cautioned. "We need to make it last." She drank gratefully, then remembered his wound. "Let me see your arm." He hesitated, then sat beside her and rolled up his sleeve. The bullet had grazed his upper arm, leaving a bloody furrow in the muscle. "It needed cleaning. I'll need water and cloth," she said, slipping into the practical mode that had gotten her through childbirth, her husband's death, and the countless crises of raising 3 young children alone. Jackson opened his saddlebag and produced a small medical kit. "Rebecca thinks of everything," he said with a hint of a smile. Hannah cleaned the wound with water and a strip of cloth, then applied a salve from the kit. "This needs stitching, but it will have to wait. This should keep infection at bay until we reach town." "You've done this before," he observed as she worked. "My husband enlisted with the Illinois Volunteers during the war," she explained. "I nursed wounded soldiers at Camp Douglas before the twins were born. I saw far worse injuries than this." She tied a bandage around his arm, her fingers brushing against his skin. A moment of silence fell between them, broken only by the soft crackle of the fire and the children's steady breathing. "Why did Robert trust you?" Hannah asked finally, the question that had been nagging at her since they left Silver Creek. "You said you weren't friends, yet he entrusted you with documents that could get a man killed." Jackson's expression grew distant. "We had a complicated relationship. My father saved his life during a cattle drive years ago. A flash flood nearly took them both, but my father got Robert to safety at the cost of his own health. He never fully recovered. So it was a debt of honor." "Partly," Jackson admitted, "but there was more to it. When my parents died, my father from his weakened lungs, my mother from grief soon after, most of the townspeople turned their backs on Rebecca and me. We were half-breeds, unwelcome in both worlds. Robert was one of the few who treated us fairly." "How did you get your ranch?" Hannah asked. "If the town was so hostile." "My father left us the land but little else. It was hard going at first. Rebecca and I worked other people's ranches, saved every penny. When we finally had enough to buy our first small herd, Hargrove tried to stop the sale." "Why would he do that?" Jackson's face hardened. "Because men, like Hargrove, believe people like us should remain servants, never equals. Robert stepped in, guaranteed the sale with his own money, said he was repaying a debt to my father." He looked down at his hands. "I didn't want his help, but we needed those cattle." Hannah was beginning to understand the complex web of debts, loyalties, and prejudices that defined life in Silver Creek. "And Bennett, where does he fit into all this?" "Bennett represents everything that's changing in the territory," Jackson said. The railroads, the banks, the big cattle operations pushing out smaller ranchers. He sees me as a relic of the past, something to be swept aside in the name of progress. Yet you've built a successful ranch despite him. A ghost of a smile touched Jackson's lips. That's what infuriates him the most. He's offered to buy me out 12 times, each offer more insulting than the last. Hannah nodded, pieces falling into place. So when Robert began buying land along the railroad route, it was a direct challenge to Bennett's plans, Jackson finished. And when the railroad showed interest in Parker's water rights instead of Bennett's proposed route, it became personal. Personal enough to kill for, Hannah whispered, glancing at her sleeping children. The thought that she had brought them into such danger made her blood run cold. Jackson must have read her thoughts in her expression. "You couldn't have known," he said gently. "Robert never fully explained the danger in his letters. He probably thought he could resolve it before you arrived." "And now?" Hannah asked. "And what happens now?" "Now we get these documents to Marshal Caldwell," Jackson said firmly. "With federal authority behind the investigation, even Bennett's money can't protect him. Once we've done that, you'll be safe to decide your own future." A log shifted in the fire, sending sparks upward through the natural chimney. The dancing light cast Jackson's face in sharp relief, highlighting the strong line of his jaw, the determination in his eyes. "And what of your future, Mr. Miller?" Hannah asked softly. Something flickered in his expression, pain, longing, resignation. She couldn't be sure. "My future has always been the ranch," he said finally, "keeping what my father built, making it something my mother would have been proud of." "A worthy goal," Hannah acknowledged, "but a lonely one." "We should rest," he said, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of their conversation. "I'll take first watch. You sleep." Despite her exhaustion, sleep didn't come easily to Hannah. Her mind raced with everything she had learned. About Robert, about Bennett and Hargrove, and perhaps most troublingly, about Jackson Miller. The mysterious half-Blackfoot rancher had risked his life for her and her children, honoring a promise to a man who hadn't even been his friend. What kind of man did that? When she finally drifted off, her dreams were a jumbled mess of gunfire, running horses, and dark, watchful eyes. Dawn brought pale light filtering through the cave's natural chimney. Hannah awoke to find the twins already up, whispering excitedly, as Jackson showed them how to identify different animal tracks imprinted in the soft earth near the cave entrance. "Look, Mama!" Timothy called when he saw she was awake. "Mr. Miller showed us deer tracks and rabbit tracks and even wolf tracks." "He says wolves don't bother people unless they're starving," Thomas added, with the authority of newly acquired knowledge. Jackson straightened from his crouched position. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I expected," Hannah admitted, stretching. "Stiff muscles." Sarah still slumbered peacefully in her makeshift bed. "Thank you for entertaining the boys." "They're quick learners," he said with a warmth in his voice she hadn't heard before. "They'll make fine trackers someday." After a simple breakfast of jerky and dried fruit from Jackson's saddlebag, they prepared to leave the shelter. The plan was to follow the stream down to where it joined a larger creek, then make their way toward town in hopes of intercepting Marshal Caldwell. "How's your arm?" Hannah asked as they packed the few supplies they had. "Stiff, but the bleeding stopped," Jackson replied. "Your doctoring worked." They set out just as the sun cleared the eastern mountains, casting long shadows through the trees. The day promised to be clear and mild, good traveling weather. The twins bounded ahead along the stream bank, their fear from the previous night apparently forgotten in the adventure of the moment. Sarah, now fully awake, babbled happily from her sling, reaching out to touch leaves and branches as they passed. Hannah kept the leather folder of documents secured inside her coat, its weight a constant reminder of what was at stake. They had been walking for perhaps an hour when Jackson suddenly froze, raising a hand for them to stop. He cocked his head, listening intently, then pulled Hannah and the children behind a large fallen tree. "Riders," he whispered. coming this way. Hannah gathered the twins close, her heart racing. Had Hargrove's men found their trail? The sound of horses grew louder, several of them moving at a steady pace. Jackson peered cautiously over the log, then relaxed slightly. "It's a posse," he said, "and I think that's Marshal Caldwell in the lead." Relief washed through Hannah. "Should we show ourselves?" Jackson nodded. "Stay here with the children. Let me approach them first. Some of those men might be from town, and they won't all be friendly." He stood and moved into a clearing where he could be seen, raising his hands to show he was unarmed. "Marshal Caldwell," he called out. "Jackson Miller, we need your help." The riders halted, and a tall man with a silver star pinned to his vest spurred his horse forward. "Miller, what the devil are you doing out here? We got word there was trouble." "At Parker's ranch." "There was," Jackson confirmed. "Hargrove and his men tried to kill us last night. I've got Robert Parker's widow and her children with me, and evidence that Parker was murdered on Maxwell Bennett's orders." The marshal dismounted, his expression serious. "That's a grave accusation, Miller. Where's the widow?" Jackson motioned for Hannah to join them. She emerged from behind the log, leading the twins by the hand. "Marshal Caldwell," she said, with as much dignity as she could muster in her trail-worn state. "I'm Hannah Morgan. These are my children." Caldwell tipped his hat. "Ma'am, sorry about your loss. Miller here says you have evidence of foul play." Hannah reached into her coat and produced the leather folder. "These documents show why Maxwell Bennett wanted Robert dead. It's about the railroad land deals." Caldwell took the folder and flipped through it quickly, his eyebrows rising as he scanned the contents. "This is serious stuff, Mrs. Morgan. Land fraud, railroad corruption, enough to hang a man if it led to murder." He looked up at her. "You willing to testify to all this?" "I am," Hannah said firmly. "Robert was killed because of these dealings, and now Bennett and Hargrove are trying to force me and my children off the land. Robert left us." "Left you?" Caldwell's brow furrowed. "I was told Parker died without a will." "He transferred the deed to me before his death," Hannah explained. "Jackson has seen it." Caldwell glanced at Jackson, who nodded confirmation. "Well now," the marshal said, stroking his moustache thoughtfully. "That changes things considerably." He turned to his posse. "Johnson, take Mrs. Morgan and her children to town. Get them settled at the hotel under guard. Mitchell, you and Davis ride to the Parker ranch. See if Hargrove or his men left any evidence behind." He turned back to Hannah and Jackson. "The rest of us are going to pay a visit to Mr. Maxwell Bennett. I think it's time he answered some questions about land speculation and Robert Parker's convenient accident." As one of the deputies helped Hannah and the children onto a horse, she looked back at Jackson. "You're coming to town." He shook his head. "I need to check on Rebecca first, make sure she's all right. Hargrove might have gone to my ranch after losing our trail." He met her gaze steadily. "I'll find you in town." It wasn't until the deputy was leading them away that Hannah realized Jackson had called her Robert Parker's widow, not his mail-order bride or his intended. In that small courtesy, he had granted her a dignity that the law might not recognize, but that mattered deeply all the same. The ride to Silver Creek was mercifully uneventful. Deputy Johnson was taciturn but kind, especially to the children. He stopped frequently to let them rest and shared his canteen and jerky with them without complaint. As they approached the town, Hannah felt a strange mixture of dread and determination. This place that had welcomed her with suspicion and tragedy, just days ago now, held the key to her children's future. Whether that future lay with Parker's ranch or somewhere else entirely remained to be seen. The hotel proprietor, Mrs. Henderson, clucked sympathetically when they arrived, bustling about to prepare a room and hot baths for Hannah and the children. "You poor dears," she kept saying. "What a terrible ordeal." Word of their arrival spread quickly, and by evening a small crowd had gathered outside the hotel, curious to see the woman at the center of the brewing scandal. Deputy Johnson stood guard at the door, turning away the merely curious and admitting only those with official business. A young man who introduced himself as Liam Foster, assistant to Judge Hollister, arrived shortly before supper. "The judge would like to speak with you tomorrow, Mrs. Morgan," he explained, "about the documents you've brought forward and your claim to the Parker property." "Is my claim in question?" Hannah asked, alarm rising in her chest. "Not at all," Foster assured her. "But there are procedures to follow, paperwork to file. The judge wants to make sure everything is done properly so that Bennett and his lawyer can't challenge it later." That made sense, and Hannah agreed to meet with the judge in the morning. Later, as she tucked the twins into bed in their hotel room, Timothy asked the question she'd been dreading. "Mama, are we going to live at Mr. Parker's ranch now?" Hannah smoothed his hair back from his forehead. "I don't know yet, sweetheart. It depends on many things." "I like Mr. Miller's ranch better," Thomas declared, yawning widely. "It has horses and a library and pictures on the cave walls." Hannah smiled at his child's logic. "Well, we'll see. Right now we need to make sure we're safe, and then we can decide where our home will be." "Is Mr. Miller coming back?" Timothy asked, his eyes already drifting closed. "Yes," Hannah said, hoping. She spoke the truth. "He'll come find us when he can." Long after the children were asleep, Hannah sat by the window, watching the quiet street below. So much had happened in the span of just a few days. She had arrived in Silver Creek expecting to meet the man whose letters had promised security, and perhaps eventually affection. Instead, she had found herself embroiled in a deadly land dispute, her children's safety threatened, and her future uncertain. And then there was Jackson Miller, a man who defied all her expectations. Half Blackfoot in a town where that parentage marked him as an outsider, yet successful enough to earn the town's grudging respect. A man of few words but decisive action, who had risked his life for her and her children to honor a promise to someone who wasn't even a friend. A soft knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. Deputy Johnson's voice came through the wood. "Mrs. Morgan, Marshal Caldwell's back. He'd like to speak with you if you're not yet retired." Hannah opened the door. "Of course, are the children safe here alone?" "I'll stand right outside their door, ma'am," Johnson promised. "No one will get past me." Downstairs in the hotel's small private dining room, Marshal Caldwell waited, hat in hand, his expression grave but satisfied. "Mrs. Morgan," he said, rising as she entered, "thank you for coming down. I thought you'd want to know. We've arrested Maxwell Bennett." Relief flooded through her. "On what charges?" "Land fraud for starters," Caldwell replied. "But it gets better. His clerk, a nervous fellow named Oliver Hayes, started talking as soon as we showed up with badges. Bennett ordered him to tamper with Parker's saddle the day before his accident. Says it wasn't the first time Bennett had arranged convenient mishaps for people who got in his way." "So it was murder," Hannah whispered. "Looks that way," Caldwell nodded grimly. "We're holding Bennett over for the circuit judge. Hayes has agreed to testify against him in exchange for leniency." "And Hargrove?" "No sign of him yet," Caldwell admitted. "But we've got men watching the roads and the border. He won't get far." He studied her face. "You should know. Judge Hollister has reviewed your deed to the Parker Ranch. It's legal and binding. The property is yours, Mrs. Morgan. Free and clear." Hannah sat down heavily in the nearest chair, the reality of it washing over her. She owned a ranch. She, who had been on the verge of destitution in Chicago just weeks ago, now possessed valuable property that could secure her children's future. "There's something else," Caldwell continued. "Any word from Miller? He never showed up in town, and we found signs of a struggle at his ranch when we sent men to check on it." Hannah's blood ran cold. "What kind of signs?" "Nothing conclusive. Caldwell said quickly, but his sister was gone, and there had been gunfire. We're thinking Hargrove might have taken them both. Leverage, maybe, or revenge. The room seemed to swim around her, Jackson and Rebecca, captured or worse, because they had helped her, because Jackson had kept his promise to Robert. "We have to find them," she said, rising to her feet. "Marshall, you don't understand. If Hargrove has them, we'll find them, Mrs. Morgan," Caldwell assured her, but his expression was grave. "But Silver Creek County is vast, and Hargrove knows it better than most. If he's taken them into the high country, then we need someone who knows the high country even better," Hannah interrupted, a plan already forming in her mind. "We need the Blackfoot." Marshal Caldwell stared at Hannah as if she'd lost her mind. "The Blackfoot, Mrs. Morgan, relations with the tribes are complicated at best. They don't typically involve themselves in white men's disputes." "Jackson, Miller is half Blackfoot," Hannah insisted. "His mother's people might help if they knew he was in danger." "Even if that's true, we'd need to find them first," Caldwell replied. "The nearest Blackfoot settlement is miles from here, in the foothills of the Sawback Range." Hannah leaned forward. "Does anyone in town know how to reach them?" Caldwell hesitated, then sighed. "There's an old trapper named Winslow who trades with the Blackfoot, lives in a cabin about 5 miles north of town. If anyone can get word to them, it's him." "Then we need to find Winslow immediately," Hannah said, rising from her chair. "Mrs. Morgan," Caldwell's voice softened, "I understand your concern for Miller, but you have 3 young children to consider. The safest place for you is right here under my protection." Hannah's jaw tightened. "My children will remain here. Deputy Johnson can guard them, but I'm going with you to find Winslow." Caldwell studied her face, clearly recognizing the determination there. "You're quite different from most Eastern ladies I've met, Mrs. Morgan." "Circumstances have made me so," she replied simply, after arranging for Mrs. Henderson to look in on the sleeping children and confirming that Deputy Johnson would remain vigilant outside their door. Hannah changed into the practical riding clothes Rebecca had given her. Within the hour, she and Marshal Caldwell were riding north out of Silver Creek toward the trapper's cabin. The night was clear and cold, stars scattered across the vast Montana sky like diamonds on black velvet. Hannah had never seen such stars. In Chicago, where city lights and coal smoke dimmed the heavens. Out here, the sky seemed endless, both beautiful and humbling in its immensity. "Winslow's an odd character," Caldwell warned as they rode. "Been living alone in these mountains for 30 years. Not much for conversation, especially with strangers. Do you think he'll help us?" "Hard to say. He respects the Blackfoot. Lived with them for a time in his younger days, but he's wary of getting involved in other people's troubles." The cabin, when they finally reached it, was little more than a crude shelter built against a rocky hillside, smoke curling from a stone chimney. A pack of wolf dogs announced their arrival with menacing growls until a sharp whistle from within silenced them. The door creaked open, revealing a wizened old man with a long grey beard and piercing blue eyes. A rifle rested casually in his arms. "Bit late for social calls, Marshal," he said, his voice raspy with age and disuse. "Not a social call, Winslow," Caldwell replied. "We need your help." The old man's gaze shifted to Hannah, curious but not unkind. "Who's the lady?" "Hannah Morgan," she introduced herself. "Jackson Miller and his sister Rebecca have been taken by Hargrove. We need to reach the Blackfoot for help." Winslow's eyebrows rose. "Jackson's in trouble, is he? Boy always did have a talent for finding it." He seemed to consider for a moment, then stepped back from the door. "Better come in then. Night's getting colder." The cabin's interior was surprisingly neat, if Spartan, with a small fire burning in a stone hearth. Animal pelts covered the walls and floor, and bundles of herbs hung from the ceiling beams. Winslow gestured for them to sit on wooden stools near the fire. "So Hargrove's finally made his move against the Miller place," Winslow said, settling. into a chair fashioned from antlers and rawhide. Been coming for years. You know of the feud? Hannah asked. Know of it? I watched it begin. Winslow snorted. Hargrove's father tried to drive Jackson's parents off their land back when the boy was no bigger than your twins, failed then too. Hannah exchanged a surprised glance with Caldwell. You know about my children. News travels, even to old hermits. Winslow shrugged. Eastern widow, 3 little ones, mail order bride to Robert Parker, who wound up dead before you arrived. Now you're tangled up with the Millers and Bennett's been arrested for murder. He chuckled at their astonishment. The wind whispers secrets to those who know how to listen. Then perhaps the wind has whispered where Hargrove might have taken them, Caldwell suggested dryly. Winslow's expression grew serious. 3 possibilities. His ranch, but that'd be too obvious. The old mining claim up Broken Jaw Canyon, but that's not safe this time of year with the spring melt. Most likely he's taken them to Raven's Peak. What's at Raven's Peak? Hannah asked. Old trapper's cabin, bigger than this one. Hargrove uses it during hunting season. Winslow scratched his beard thoughtfully. It's defensible, hard to approach, without being seen. If he's holed up there, he'd see a posse coming from miles away. Which is why we need the Blackfoot, Hannah pressed. They would know ways to approach unseen. Winslow studied her intently. You care for him, Jackson. It wasn't a question, and Hannah didn't treat it as one. He risked his life to protect me and my children. I won't abandon him now. The old trapper nodded slowly. Fire Ghost's band is camped near Wolf Creek, about 15 miles northwest of here. Fire Ghost is Jackson's uncle on his mother's side. They've stayed in touch over the years, though quietly. The boy walks in 2 worlds, not always comfortably in either. Will Fire Ghost help us? Caldwell asked. For his sister's son, yes. For you? Winslow shrugged. That depends on whether you go as lawman or as man, meaning leave the badge behind, Marshal. The Blackfoot have no reason to trust the government's word on anything, but they understand blood debts and honor. He turned to Hannah. A mother fighting for her children's protector, that they'll respect. Hannah nodded, suddenly understanding why she needed to come. Can you take us to them? No, Winslow said flatly. Too old for night riding, and these bones feel a storm coming, but I can send word. He reached for a cedar box on a nearby shelf and removed a polished bone whistle and a small leather pouch. Fire Ghost has a scout watching my cabin, has for years. This will tell him you come in peace seeking help. He handed the whistle and pouch to Hannah. Blow 3 long notes at the fork in Wolf Creek. Then burn this tobacco as an offering. Wait, they'll find you. And if they don't come? Caldwell asked skeptically. Winslow's piercing eyes fixed on the marshal. Then Hargrove's picked a burial ground, not a hiding place. Either way, you'll know by dawn. They left Winslow's cabin with directions to Wolf Creek and the promised storm beginning to gather on the horizon. Dark clouds obscured the stars as they rode northwest, the temperature dropping rapidly. We should make the creek by midnight, Caldwell said, glancing at the sky with concern. But if this storm hits before we find the Blackfoot... We keep going, Hannah said firmly. Every hour counts for Jackson and Rebecca. The first snowflakes began to fall as they reached Wolfie Creek, large white flakes swirling in the rising wind. They followed the creek upstream until they reached the fork Winslow had described, a place where the water divided around a large flat rock before reuniting again downstream. Hannah dismounted, her legs stiff from hours of riding. The bone whistle felt smooth and cold in her gloved hand as she raised it to her lips. The sound it produced was haunting, a long, mournful note that carried across the water and into the surrounding forest. She blew 3 times as instructed, then opened the leather pouch and sprinkled the tobacco onto the flat rock. What now? Caldwell asked, his voice nearly lost in the strengthening wind. Now we wait, Hannah replied, pulling her coat tighter. Against the cold, they huddled beneath a stand of pine trees as the snow fell more heavily around them. Hannah's thoughts turned to her children, safe and warm at the hotel, unaware that their mother was standing in a snowy forest in the middle of the night, waiting for people she'd never met to help rescue a man she barely knew. The absurdity of it struck her suddenly, and she might have laughed if she weren't so cold and frightened. An hour passed, then another. The storm intensified, reducing visibility to mere feet. Caldwell had just suggested they seek better shelter when Hannah felt, rather than heard, a presence behind her. She turned slowly to find herself facing 3 mounted warriors, their faces painted, feathers adorning their long black hair. They had approached in perfect silence, despite the snow and darkness. One warrior, older than the others with streaks of grey in his hair, studied her intently. "You seek Fire Ghost," he said in accented but clear English. Hannah stepped forward, snow crunching beneath her boots. "I am Hannah Morgan. Jackson Miller and his sister have been taken by a man named Hargrove. We need Fire Ghost's help to rescue them." The warrior remained impassive. "Why does a white woman seek to help the son of White Elk?" "White Elk? Hannah?" He questioned. "Jackson's mother," Caldwell murmured beside her, "her Blackfoot name." Hannah straightened her shoulders, meeting the warrior's gaze directly. "Jackson Miller risked his life to protect me and my children when we had no one else. He honored a promise to a dead man by sheltering us. Now I would honor my debt to him." The warrior exchanged glances with his companions, a silent communication passing between them. Finally he nodded. "I am Fire Ghost. White Elk was my sister. Her son is of our blood, though he walks the white man's path." He gestured to the horses behind him. "Come, the storm grows worse." They rode through the blizzard, following the Blackfoot warriors along paths invisible to Hannah's eyes. How they maintained their direction in such conditions seemed nothing short of miraculous. After what felt like hours, they descended into a sheltered valley where a cluster of hide-covered lodges stood arranged in a circle. Fires burned inside each lodge, their glow visible through the hides despite the swirling snow. The Blackfoot camp was alive with activity despite the late hour and storm. Word of their arrival spread quickly, and curious faces, especially children's, peered out at the white visitors as Fire Ghost led them to the largest lodge at the center of the circle. Inside, the lodge was warm and smoky, the central fire casting dancing shadows on the painted hides that formed the walls. Several older men and women sat in a circle around the fire, their faces solemn and weathered. Fire Ghost introduced Hannah and Marshal Caldwell, explaining their purpose in halting formal phrases that seemed part ritual, part translation. One of the elders, a woman with a deeply lined face and penetrating black eyes, spoke at length in the Blackfoot language. Fire Ghost listened, nodding occasionally, then turned to Hannah. "Night Crane was a friend to White Elk," he explained. "She says the spirits have shown her Hargrove's hiding place. It is as the old trapper said, Raven's Peak, but there is danger there beyond Hargrove's men." "What kind of danger?" Caldwell asked. "The mountain is unstable after the winter's heavy. Snows. An avalanche waits like a sleeping bear. One loud noise could wake it." Hannah's stomach tightened with fear. "Jackson and Rebecca are there? You're certain?" Fire Ghost nodded. "Our hunters saw Hargrove and 6 men take them there yesterday. They did not interfere because we did not know Hargrove had taken White Elk's children against their will." "Can we rescue them?" Hannah asked, trying to keep the desperation from her voice. The Blackfoot elder spoke again, her hands moving to illustrate her words. Fire Ghost translated. "Night Crane says there is a way to approach the cabin from above, through the pine forest. The snow is less deep there, the path hidden from below, but we must go before the sun rises high enough to weaken the snow further." "How many warriors can you spare?" Caldwell asked. Fire Ghost looked offended. "This is not your posse, Marshal. This is a matter of family. I will go with 5 of our best hunters, and you and the woman. Mrs. Morgan should remain here, Caldwell protested. It's too dangerous. Fireghost looked at Hannah, and she met his gaze steadily. I've already left my children behind to come this far. I won't turn back now. The Blackfoot nodded, approval glinting in his dark eyes. You have a warrior's heart, Hannah Morgan. White Elk would have liked you. He turned to the elders, speaking rapidly in his own language. After a brief discussion, they seemed to reach a consensus. We leave in 2 hours, Fireghost announced. Rest while you can. The path to Raven's Peak is not easy, even in good weather. They were given furs to sleep on and thick buffalo robes for warmth. Hannah lay down gratefully, her body exhausted from the long ride, but her mind remained restless. The stakes had risen with every passing hour. Now she was not only fighting for Jackson and Rebecca, but potentially risking her own life as well. If something happened to her, what would become of her children? Yet the alternative, abandoning Jackson to Hargrove's mercy, was unthinkable. He had put himself between her family and danger without hesitation. Could she do any less for him? She must have dozed despite her worries, for the next thing she knew, a gentle hand was shaking her awake. A young Blackfoot woman offered her a steaming cup of something that smelled like pine and herbs. Drink, the woman said in halting English. Give strength for journey. The tea was bitter but warming, spreading a tingling alertness through Hannah's limbs. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving a world transformed by snow. The sky was beginning to lighten in the east, the stars fading into the pale blue of dawn. Fireghost and his warriors were making final preparations, checking weapons and securing supplies. They had brought extra horses for Jackson and Rebecca. Assuming the rescue would be successful, Hannah tried not to think about the alternative. The plan is simple, Fireghost explained as they prepared to depart. We approach from above, where Hargrove will not expect trouble. 2 warriors will create a distraction to draw out the guards. The rest of us will enter the cabin and free White Elk's children. What about Hargrove? Caldwell asked, checking his pistol. Fireghost's expression hardened. Hargrove has been a thorn in my people's side for many winters. He has hunted on our lands, polluted our streams with his mining operations, threatened our hunters. Today, his evil ends. The marshal looked uncomfortable but didn't argue. This was Blackfoot territory, and they were operating well outside the normal boundaries of the law. The ride to Raven's Peak took most of the morning, their progress slowed by deep snow and treacherous terrain. As they climbed higher, the world grew quieter, the only sounds the creak of saddle leather and the muffled hoofbeats of their horses in the snow. They left the horses in a sheltered grove and continued on foot, following a narrow game trail that wound through dense pines. Fireghost moved silently despite the snow, and Hannah did her best to mimic his careful steps. Every so often he would hold up a hand, and they would freeze in place as he listened to the mountain. Finally, they reached a rocky outcropping that offered a view of the cabin below. It was larger than Hannah had expected, built of massive logs with a stone chimney from which smoke curled lazily into the clear air. 2 men with rifles patrolled the clearing in front of the cabin, while a third sat on the porch cleaning a gun. Of Hargrove himself, there was no sign. Fireghost studied the scene, then turned to his warriors and gave instructions in a whisper. 2 of them melted away into the forest, moving toward the opposite side of the clearing. When you hear the owl, call 3 times, he told Hannah and Caldwell. Be ready to move. We will have only moments before Hargrove realizes it is a diversion. Minutes ticked by, the tension building with each passing second. Hannah's heart pounded so loudly she was certain the guards below must hear it. Then from the forest across the clearing came the haunting call of an owl. Once, twice, 3 times. As if on cue, a massive pine limb weighed down with snow cracked loudly and crashed to the ground, narrowly missing one of the patrolling guards. The men below shouted in alarm, all three running toward the source of the disturbance with rifles raised. "Now!" Fire Ghost hissed, and they were moving, sliding down the snowy slope toward the rear of the cabin. They reached the back door without being spotted. One of the warriors examined the lock, then produced a long knife and worked it between the door and frame. There was a soft snap, and the door swung open. They slipped inside, weapons ready. The cabin's main room was empty, save for a table littered with bottles and playing cards. A fire burned low in the hearth, casting weak light across the rustic interior. A noise from a side room drew their attention, a muffled thump followed by the rattle of chains. Fire Ghost moved swiftly to the door, easing it open with the barrel of his rifle. Inside, Jackson and Rebecca sat with their backs against the wall, their hands and feet bound with heavy chains. Both showed signs of rough treatment. Bruises darkened Jackson's face, and a dried trail of blood ran from Rebecca's temple. They looked up in astonishment as their rescuers entered. "Hannah?" Jackson's voice was hoarse with disbelief. "What are you doing here?" "Saving you, apparently," she replied, kneeling beside him to examine the chains, while Fire Ghost greeted his nephew in their native tongue. "Where's Hargrove?" "Gone to town," Rebecca said weakly. "Went to gather more men. Said he was going to burn Miller Ranch to the ground, then come after you and the children next." Cold dread washed through Hannah. "When did he leave?" "Just after dawn," Jackson said, understanding her fear immediately. "Hannah, the children, they're at the hotel in Silver Creek," she assured him. "Deputy Johnson is guarding them. They're safe." Caldwell had found a heavy iron key hanging on a nail by the door. "Let's get these chains off and clear out before." Hargrove's men realized they'd been tricked. The locks opened with surprising ease, freeing Jackson and Rebecca from their bonds. Jackson stood unsteadily, helped by his uncle. "We need to warn the town," he said urgently. "Hargrove's gone mad. He blames me for Bennett's arrest, thinks I've been working against him for years." "Marshal Caldwell's with us," Hannah explained. "He can send riders ahead." Her words were cut off by a shout from outside, followed by the crack of a rifle. One of Fire Ghost's warriors staggered through the door, blood spreading across his buckskin shirt. "They're back," he gasped in Blackfoot. The words translated quickly by Fire Ghost. "Hargrove has returned with more men." Caldwell peered cautiously out a window. "At least 8 riders coming up the trail. We're outnumbered and trapped," Jackson added grimly. "That trail is the only way down the mountain for horses." Fire Ghost's eyes narrowed. "Not the only way." He turned to Hannah. "The way we came, through the pine forest. It is dangerous, but possible. On foot, maybe," Caldwell argued, "but not with wounded people." Jackson exchanged a look with his uncle, some unspoken understanding passing between them. "There's another option," he said slowly. "The mine shaft." Rebecca's eyes widened. "Jackson, no, it's not stable, especially with all this snow." "What mine shaft?" Hannah asked. "There's an old silver mine that runs through the mountain," Jackson explained. "One entrance is just behind this cabin, hidden by brush. The main entrance comes out 3 miles below, near the creek." "Is it safe?" Caldwell questioned. "It wasn't abandoned because the silver ran out," Rebecca said darkly. "It was abandoned because of cave-ins. Outside, they could hear Hargrove's men spreading out, surrounding the cabin. A voice called out, 'Hargrove himself! Miller, I know you're in there. Come out now, or we'll burn the place down around you.'" Caldwell checked his ammunition. "We don't have much choice. It's fight or try the mine." "The mine," Hannah said decisively. "For my children's sake, we need to warn the town about Hargrove's plans." Jackson nodded, a new respect in his eyes. "This way, and move quietly. Any loud noise could bring down more than just the mine." They slipped out the back door in single file, keeping low and using the cabin for cover. 20 yards away, partially hidden by a snow-covered rockfall, was the wooden frame of a mine entrance, its timbers grey with age. Jackson pulled away the brush concealing the opening, revealing a black moor that seemed to breathe cold, stale air from the mountain's depths. "Stay close," he warned. "The tunnel forks about a quarter-mile in. Take the left passage. The right one's flooded." They entered. The darkness, just as a shout went up from one of Hargrove's men who had circled behind the cabin. A bullet splintered the wood beside Hannah's head as she ducked into the mine entrance. Fire Ghost took a position at the entrance, rifle ready. "Go," he told them. "I will delay them." "Uncle," Jackson began, but the older man cut him off. "I cannot navigate the mine with my old eyes," he said, "and someone must slow them down. Go now, sister-son. Protect your new family as I protect mine." Before Jackson could protest further, the sound of multiple footsteps crunching through snow announced the approach of Hargrove's men. Fire Ghost pushed them deeper into the tunnel, then turned to face the entrance, his rifle raised. The last thing Hannah saw before Jackson pulled her around a bend in the tunnel was Fire Ghost silhouetted against the daylight, proud and defiant as the first of Hargrove's men came into view. Then darkness swallowed them whole. The darkness in the mine was absolute, a living thing that pressed against their skin and filled their lungs with each breath. Jackson led the way, one hand touching the rough wall for guidance, the other holding Hannah's hand to keep her connected to the group. Behind her came Rebecca, supported by Caldwell, while the remaining Blackfoot warriors brought up the rear. "Watch your step," Jackson cautioned as they navigated the uneven ground. "The floor drops away in places." Hannah could hear water dripping somewhere in the distance, the sound echoing off unseen walls. The air was damp and cold, heavy with the scent of earth and minerals. She tried not to think about the thousands of tons of rock and soil above them, or how little it would take to bring it all crashing down. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew louder, shouts and curses as Hargrove's men entered the mine. A gunshot boomed in the confined space, the sound deafening as it reverberated through the tunnel. "No shooting!" Jackson hissed urgently. The vibrations could trigger a collapse. They quickened their pace as much as safety allowed, feeling their way forward in the darkness. Hannah's heart raced with fear for her children. If Hargrove reached Silver Creek before they could warn the town, the tunnel forked, just as Jackson had said it would. He led them down the left passage without hesitation, though to Hannah both looked equally forbidding. The ceiling lowered here, forcing them to crouch as they moved forward. "How much farther?" Caldwell asked, his voice tight with tension. "Half a mile, maybe more," Jackson replied. "The tunnel widens again soon. Then there's a series of chambers where they process the ore. After that, it's a straight shot to the main entrance." A rumble shook the passage, sending small cascades of dirt and pebbles raining down on them. Everyone froze. "Was that—" Hannah began. "Thunder," Rebecca assured her, though she sounded far from certain. "Just thunder from the storm." The tunnels began to slope downward, making their progress easier, but also causing the ground to become slick with moisture. Hannah slipped once, saved from falling only by Jackson's firm grip on her hand. Almost to the processing chambers, he murmured encouragingly. The pursuit behind them had grown quieter, suggesting that Hargrove's men were proceeding with more caution after the warning rumble. Hannah took small comfort in the delay. Every minute gained improved their chances of reaching Silver Creek in time. The tunnel suddenly opened into a vast chamber, its dimensions impossible to judge in the darkness. Their footsteps echoed differently, here bouncing off distant walls and a ceiling that must have been 20 feet high or more. "Here," one of the Blackfoot warriors said, striking a match. The small flame revealed massive wooden structures, sluice tables, sorting platforms, and the remnants of a crushing mill. Rusted tools lay scattered about, abandoned when the mine was closed. "We should rest for a moment," Caldwell suggested, noting Rebecca's labored breathing. Jackson nodded reluctantly. "Just a few minutes. Hargrove won't be far behind." They sank down against one of the wooden platforms. In the dim light of another match, Hannah could see the toll captivity had taken on Jackson and Rebecca. Both were gaunt, their eyes shadowed with exhaustion and pain. "What happened at your ranch?" Hannah asked softly as Rebecca drank from a water skin one of the warriors offered. "Hargrove and his men came just after dawn," Jackson explained, his voice bitter. "They set fire to the barn first, to draw us out. When we tried to stop the spread to the house, they ambushed us." Rebecca nodded grimly. "They knew you and the children had been there. Hargrove kept asking where you'd gone." "How did he know?" Hannah wondered. "The hotel clerk in Silver Creek," Caldwell surmised. "Recognized you when you came through with me and put the pieces together. Hargrove probably paid him for information." A distant shout echoed through the chamber. Hargrove's men had reached the fork in the tunnel. Time was running out. "We need to move," Jackson said, rising stiffly to his feet. "The main entrance isn't far now." They navigated through the processing chamber and into another tunnel, wider than the first but supported by wooden beams that had begun to rot with age and moisture. Water dripped steadily from the ceiling, forming puddles on the uneven floor. As they progressed, Hannah became aware of a subtle change in the air. It seemed fresher somehow, with hints of pine and snow. The exit must be near. A gunshot shattered the silence, the bullet ricocheting off the stone walls behind them. They ducked instinctively, pressing against the tunnel walls for cover. "I see you, Miller," Hargrove's voice echoed through the passage. "You and your Indian friends and that widow woman. Did you really think you could escape me in my own mine?" Jackson pushed Hannah ahead of him. "Keep going," he whispered urgently. "The entrance is just beyond that bend. Get to Silver Creek and warn them." "What about you?" she protested. "I'll delay them with Caldwell and the warriors. Rebecca will go with you. She knows a shortcut to town from the mine entrance." Before Hannah could argue further, a massive crack split the air, louder than any thunder. The timbers above them groaned, then splintered as a section of the ceiling gave way, sending a cascade of rock and dirt onto the tunnel floor between them and their pursuers. "Cave in!" Caldwell shouted. "Move, now!" They ran, abandoning. Caution, as the tunnel continued to collapse behind them. Hannah could hear Hargrove and his men shouting in panic as tons of earth cut them off from their prey. Daylight suddenly appeared ahead, a ragged opening partially covered with brush and young saplings. They burst through into the blinding whiteness of snow-covered forest, gulping the clean air gratefully. Behind them, dust billowed from the mine entrance as the collapse continued deeper into the mountain. An ominous rumble grew beneath their feet, and Jackson yanked Hannah away from the entrance just as the entire hillside seemed to shudder. "The whole mine is going," he said grimly, watching as cracks appeared in the ground around the entrance. "Hargrove and his men, could they have escaped back the way they came?" Hannah asked, thinking even of their enemies' lives. Jackson shook his head. "Not likely. That passage would have been the first to go." A final, thunderous crack split the air as the mine entrance collapsed completely, sealing the fate of those trapped inside. Hannah closed her eyes briefly, offering a silent prayer for all lives lost, even those who had threatened her own. "We need to reach Silver Creek," Caldwell said urgently, breaking the somber moment. "Hargrove may be gone, but he could have sent men ahead to the town." Rebecca pointed to a game trail leading down through the pine forest. "This way, it follows the creek and comes out behind the livery stable. We can be there in an hour if we hurry." They set off at a brisk pace, the Blackfoot warriors melting away into the forest with promises to spread word of Hargrove's demise to their people. The snow had begun to melt in the midday sun, making the trail slippery and treacherous in places. But they pushed on relentlessly, driven by concern for Hannah's children and the safety of the town. "I never thanked you," Jackson said, as they navigated a particularly steep section of trail, his hand steady on Hannah's elbow to keep her from slipping. "Coming after us with the Blackfoot entering the mine, that took courage few possess." "You would have done the same for me," Hannah replied simply. "In fact, you did." A ghost of a smile crossed his tired face. "I suppose I did." "Your uncle," she said hesitantly. "Fire ghost. Do you think he—" "Survived," Jackson finished for her. "If anyone could, it would be him. He's been outsmarting white men since before I was born." They reached the edge of town without incident, approaching cautiously from behind the livery stable, as Rebecca had suggested. The town appeared calm, with no sign of the chaos Hargrove had threatened. Still, they proceeded with caution, Caldwell leading the way to the hotel where Hannah's children waited. The lobby was quiet when they entered, the desk clerk looking up in surprise at their disheveled appearance. "Marshal Caldwell, Mrs. Morgan." "We've been worried sick, my children," Hannah said urgently. "Are they safe?" "They're fine, ma'am," the clerk assured her. "Deputy Johnson hasn't left his post outside your door, though your little girl's been asking you something fierce." Relief washed over Hannah like a physical force, leaving her weak-kneed with gratitude. "And the town? Has there been any trouble?" "Quiet. As a church on Monday," the clerk replied, puzzled by the question. "Though we did have some excitement this morning when they took Maxwell Bennett to Helena for trial." They exchanged confused glances. "No sign of Hargrove or his men?" Caldwell pressed. "Not a whisper," the clerk confirmed. "Rush, why should there have been?" Understanding dawned on Jackson's face. "He was bluffing," he said quietly to Hannah. "Hargrove never sent men ahead. He wanted us to think he did so. We'd be desperate, make mistakes." It made a certain twisted sense, Hannah realized. Hargrove had been playing a game of fear and intimidation from the beginning. His final bluff had cost him his life. She hurried up the stairs to her children's room, her heart pounding with anticipation. Deputy Johnson stood at attention outside the door, his weathered face breaking into a smile of relief when he saw her. "Mrs. Morgan, thank the Lord. The little ones have been asking for you all morning." "Thank you for guarding them," she said sincerely. "I'm more grateful than I can say." She opened the door to find all three children engaged in a game on the floor, supervised by Mrs. Henderson. At the sight of their mother, they abandoned their play with cries of delight, rushing into her waiting arms. "Mama!" Sarah squealed, throwing her chubby arms around Hannah's neck. "You're all dirty," Thomas observed, touching her mud-stained sleeve with fascination. Timothy looked beyond her to where Jackson stood in the doorway. "Mr. Miller, you came back too." Hannah held her children close, breathing in their familiar scents, reassuring herself that they were safe and sound. Over their heads, her eyes met Jackson's, seeing in his gaze a softness that touched her heart. The next few days passed in a blur of legal proceedings and decisions. Marshal Caldwell confirmed the deaths of Hargrove and his men when a rescue party explored what remained of the mine entrance. Fireghost appeared on the second day, walking calmly into town, as if he hadn't just escaped certain death, bringing with him the news that most of Hargrove's remaining men had fled the territory, fearing association with their boss's crimes. Judge Hollister presided over a formal hearing regarding Hannah's claim to the Parker Ranch, ultimately confirming her ownership with the added weight of a federal court ruling that would be difficult for any future challengers to dispute. "What will you do now, Mrs. Morgan?" the judge asked after the proceedings concluded. "The Parker property is valuable, especially with the railroad coming through. You could sell it and return east with a tidy sum." Hannah considered the question carefully. A week ago, she might have jumped at such an opportunity, the chance to return to familiar surroundings with enough money to establish herself and her children comfortably. But so much had changed in such a short time. "I believe we'll stay, Your Honor," she said finally. "My children have already begun to think of this place as home, and the ranch offers opportunities they wouldn't have in Chicago." What she didn't mention was the other reason, the one that sat quietly beside her throughout the hearing, Jackson Miller, whose steadfast presence had become increasingly important to her with each passing day. Jackson had offered her use of his home, while repairs were made to the Parker ranch house, which had suffered from neglect during the months it stood empty. Working alongside Rebecca and the Blackfoot craftsman sent by Fire Ghost, he threw himself into the restoration with a dedication that spoke volumes about his character. "You don't have to do all this," Hannah told him one evening as they sat on the porch of his ranch house, watching the twins chase fireflies in the gathering dusk while Sarah slept peacefully in her lap. "I know," he replied simply. "I want to." A comfortable silence fell between them, the kind that comes from shared experiences and mutual understanding. In the distance, the snow-capped mountains caught the last rays of the setting sun, turning them to gold against the darkening sky. "I received a letter today," Hannah said eventually, "from the railroad company. They're still interested in the water rights on Parker's, on my land. They've made a generous offer." Jackson nodded, unsurprised. "Bennett may be gone, but the railroad still needs that route. What will you do?" "I'm considering a counter-proposal," she replied, "granting them a right-of-way and water access in exchange for building a proper station in Silver Creek and providing permanent jobs for townspeople." Jackson looked at her with new respect. "That's shrewd negotiating, Mrs. Morgan. Robert would have approved." "I hope so," she said softly. "I never knew him, not really, but I feel I owe him something for bringing me here, even if it wasn't as he intended." "And do you regret it?" Jackson asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Coming west, I mean, given everything that's happened." Hannah gazed out at the twilight landscape, so different from the crowded streets of Chicago, yet somehow more home than that city had ever been. She thought of the opportunities this land offered her children, the freedom they would have to grow and explore in ways impossible in the East, and she thought of Jackson Miller, the most unexpected part of her journey, a man who had risked everything to protect her family when they needed it most, who continued to show through quiet actions, rather than grand declarations, that he could be trusted with her future. "No," she said finally, meeting his gaze, "I don't regret it at all." Something shifted in Jackson's expression, a guardedness giving way to cautious hope. "Hannah," he began, using her given name for one of the few times since they'd met. "I know it's too soon. You came here expecting to marry one man, and instead found yourself fighting for your life against others. The last thing you need is another complication." "Is that what you would be?" she asked. "A complication." A smile touched the corners of his mouth. "Undoubtedly. A half-Blackfoot rancher with a complicated past and a habit of making powerful enemies isn't the easiest path for a woman with 3 young children. And yet," Hannah said thoughtfully, "when I think of the future, it's difficult to imagine it without you in it." Jackson reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and took her hand in his. "I'm not asking for promises," he said. "Just possibility. Time to see if what's growing between us might flourish, like the land after spring rain." Hannah turned her hand in his, linking their fingers together. "I think that sounds perfectly reasonable, Mr. Miller." His smile widened, transforming his usual serious expression into something that made her heart skip. "Jackson," he corrected gently. "I think we've earned the right to first names, don't you?" "Jackson," she agreed, the name feeling right on her lips. In the yard, the twins had tired of chasing fireflies and were making their way back to the porch, their small faces flushed with exertion and happiness. They climbed up to sit between the adults, Timothy leaning against Jackson's side while Thomas settled next to his mother. "Mr. Miller," Timothy said, looking up at Jackson with the directness only a child can manage. "Are you going to be our new papa?" Hannah felt heat rise to her cheeks, but Jackson didn't appear flustered by the question. He considered it with the seriousness it deserved. "Would you want me to be?" he asked quietly. Both boys nodded without hesitation. "You know how to track animals," Thomas said, as if this were the most important qualification for fatherhood. "And you saved Mama from the bad men." "And you tell good stories about Indians," Timothy added. "Our real papa went to heaven when we were babies, but Mama says he'd want us to be happy." Jackson's eyes met Hannah's over the children's heads, a question in them she had no trouble interpreting. She gave him a slight nod, granting permission for whatever he might say next. "I would be honored to be your papa," he told the boys solemnly. "But that's a decision your mama and I would make together when the time is right. For now, would you be satisfied with me being your friend?" The twins considered this, exchanging one of their silent communications that Hannah had never quite understood. "I guess that's all right," Thomas decided finally, "as long as you still teach us to ride horses and shoot bows and arrows like you promised. And tell us more stories about the Blackfoot," Timothy added. Jackson chuckled, the sound warm in the gathering darkness. "I think I can manage that." Later, after the children were tucked into bed and Rebecca had retired for the night, Hannah and Jackson returned to the porch. The stars had emerged, countless diamonds scattered across the velvet blackness of the Montana sky. "You're good with them," Hannah observed. "The children, I mean." Most men would have been uncomfortable with Timothy's question. Jackson leaned against the porch railing, his profile strong against the starlit backdrop. "Children deserve honesty," he said simply. "And respect. My father taught me that. He sounds like a wise man." He was. Jackson's voice held a quiet pride. "He used to say that a man's true character isn't revealed in how he treats his equals, but in how he treats those who have no power, children, the elderly, animals." "By that measure, your character is exemplary," Hannah said softly. Jackson turned to face her, his expression serious once more. "I want you to know something, Hannah. Whatever happens between us, whether we remain friends or become something more, your children will always have my protection and support. That's not conditional on anything else." The promise touched her deeply, addressing the fear that had lingered in her heart since James's death, that her children might grow up without a man's guidance in their lives, that she alone might not be enough to prepare them for the world. "Thank you," she whispered, not trusting her voice with more. In the distance, a wolf howled, a lonely, haunting sound that seemed to embody the wild beauty of this land. Another answered, then another, the voices blending into a chorus that spoke of family, of belonging. "The Blackfoot say that wolves teach us the importance of family," Jackson said, listening to the distant song. "They mate for life and protect their young fiercely." "A good lesson," Hannah agreed. As they stood together, in the star-filled night, the future stretched before them with all its possibilities, some challenging, some bright with promise. Hannah thought of the journey that had brought her here, of the mail-order bride who had arrived to find her intended husband dead, but had discovered something perhaps more valuable. Her own strength, a community that had ultimately embraced her, and a man who saw her not as a convenient mother for his children or manager for his household, but as an equal partner worthy of respect and perhaps someday love. The Parker Ranch awaited her, a legacy she had never sought but now embraced. Silver Creek was transforming day by day, the arrested corruption of Bennett and the demise of Hargrove making way for honest growth and prosperity. And beside her stood Jackson Miller, as steady and true as the mountains themselves. She had come west seeking security for her family, and had found something far more precious, a home where they truly belonged, a future bright with hope, and the promise of a love born not from convenience, but from shared courage and mutual respect. The wolf song continued, echoing across the valley like a blessing on all that had been and all that was yet to come. Hannah closed her eyes and breathed deeply of the pine-scented air, finally at peace with her place in this wild, beautiful land that had claimed her heart as surely as she had claimed its promise. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.